When you smoked it, actually,
Yeah.
now you're on the verge.
There were conversations about like
Make you sit in the back now?
Voice. I don't get to it. I don't get to it. So
There you go. I know what you
yeah, because this is still in draft.
All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. We're already a couple minutes behind schedule.
Yeah, like
But this is fairly informal. When Lisa, Michelle, and I met, we kind of talked about wanting to talk about the equity work that all three of our different entities are doing. And so we thought we'd start with the school district. On the city portion of it, and then I'm not quite sure who's that over. JDC. I'm not sure who else is going to talk to the county, but hopefully it'll be a pretty good conversation. And I'm going to pass it off to Dr. Lewis and Dr. Stubblefield for the info.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. It may be helpful to go around and do a quick round of introductions, and so.
Justin Beeson, school board. Melissa Johnson, school board. Shannon Tennant.
Leslie Soden, Steve Lawrence, and Kelly Jones.
Stuart Bowles. So, and welcome. One of the things that I stated early on was this whole idea of governmental entities working together. And I think this conversation today definitely speaks to that. Of course, you know, this district has been doing partner with some other organizations around because this can't just be a Lawrence Public Schools. It has to be an entire Washington, we're really going to address the number of health equity is a huge one that we're able to participate in departments. Final stages of our strategic plan, of course, has equity embedded. So this is definitely a dialogue. I want to kind of share with you some of the things that definitely prior to me coming, and so that's why I asked Dr. Schofield. 11 years now? 11 years, close to 11 years, somewhere around there. But she definitely was here for the start of our equity journey. I wanted her to kind of a little bit for you to kind of share some of the things that the district has done. The initial start of equity work and kind of like where we are today. Of course, there's always challenges, and so we definitely want to. I'll turn it over to Dr. Stubbs.
Okay, and I'm gonna share a handout, and I will acknowledge that it stops, because we are in the process of updating. It stops at 2016, 17, and this can be found on our website, but I'll fill in the gaps from last year and this year, as we update it. So I will talk high level about where we begin, and kind of, you can follow this. Some refer to this as the Candyland map. And it starts down in your, the left-hand corner, and it just kind of walks you through, how we've gotten to where we are today. So it actually started informally about 2005, 2007, that was before my time, where there were some discussions around our racial achievement disparities, which we have discussions. But during that time, Dr. Bruce Passman was the deputy superintendent. Conversations to some board members and some district staff around how we can possibly start to look at the work. And they did a book study, and then a team attended the National Summit in 2008 and 2009. And that team was made up of district members, Dr. Bruce Passman, Kevin Harrell are the two that I know from district side, and some community members. And they went together and attended the summit, and when they came back, and they attended Beyond Diversity. And when they came back, the decision was made for all of the administrators to go through the training. And that was actually my first year in the district, or the summer after my first year. And I'm looking at Patrick because he was there too, so he may be able to chime in on some parts. So all district administrators, building level, district office, if you were an administrator, you attended Beyond Diversity. And so that year, that was our first step. And Beyond Diversity is a 2-day training that the focus and purpose of it is to raise your level of racial consciousness and to talk about the disparities and the inequities, specifically around white privilege and how it exists and impacts our students in the school system. So we all went through that, and at Lawrence High School, Can We Talk was introduced, and it was originally introduced by some Black male community members to mentor some Black male students, and it was a space to talk about things that were happening in the school, as well as provide some mentorship. So that started in 2009, 2010 school year. So the next year, at that time, we contracted with PEG to do some services. There was a board workshop, and then we established the district leadership team, which is still in place today. And the board members and district administrators, at the time I was the building principal, so I'm speaking about the second hand. They worked on the district equity plan. They also established the excellence equity goals, which that I worked for the next several years. And we also that year established E-teams in all of our schools, which we still currently have in place. And the purpose of the E-teams, which were was to have a cadre of staff members that could were intentional about that and still continue. So most of these things that I'm talking about, we continue and I'll talk about where, as we get closer to where we are now, what we have evolved into. So by the 12-13 year, we had E-teams in all of our schools. We started the AVID program, and AVID is Advancement via Individual Determination. And that was, AVID used specific strategies to for students take advanced classes, help them to think about being college and career ready, whether they choose to go to college or enter a career. It gives them some foundational. And that time, PG has what they call the CARE program. We introduced the CARE teams, which they do more intentional walks around curriculum and equity. We did introduce them at that time, and 13, 14, we have some teams to present at the National Summit. I think that's when we started Staff of Color, or there was a discussion, it says here, that was the year that we hired our teacher on special assignment, who was Danica. She still serves in that capacity. Her title has changed to facilitator, but when she first was hired, it was a teacher on special assignment. And then Danica and Becky Reber earn license, so they can do diversity training because it was a cost savings to us to have internal people do it. And then we started to create our own equity audit. So the district equity leadership created some at like who's enrolled in AP classes, who's been suspended, who's in different activities, but it was different checkpoints for our own internal equity audit, so that we were started to use qualitative data and quantitative data to drive our decisions. And we started to be more intentional about recruiting staff of color. And also, we introduced the Staff of Color Support Group, which is 14, 15. Prior to this, we didn't really have a strategic plan around how teachers were being, or teachers and staff were going through Beyond Diversity. At this time, we pulled all of our numbers and we were more intentional about saying which schools had how many seats, and we planned our Beyond Diversity around that. And so since then, over 90% of our staff has been trained in it. The certified staff, majority of them, we're probably closer to like 95%, but because of the constant turnover rate, classified staff, and then finding time to pull them 2 days, that's where we always will probably always be around 90%, because you always have new staff. We had some additional people present. We shifted the focus of our annual MLK celebration to recognize our staff and community members had a partnership with KU's Multicultural Center, and we did some activities with them that year. And then one of our first early community partnerships, and continue to partner, strong partnership with the Club. Their staff, we always provide seats for them to attend our students or their students. How we were showing up, so we could partner with them, and they can. Then 15, 16, we started to talk about the policies. So this is something we're continuing to talk about, like having an equity policy. We created a culturally relevant rubric for curriculum, just to have a way for as we're looking at material, a lens to look at. And then we also trained our ESC departments, and they started their E-teams that particular year. We also introduced task force that year, and they, at that time, their particular focus was around some policies and that were impacting students who marginalized in that particular area. And master plan, we start to look at like our common areas, our restrooms and our locker rooms, and how that may be impacting students and how they're that, and as you go through our buildings with some of the bond. 16, 17, culturally relevant, we introduced culturally relevant teaching, which is an Abbott training, and it specifically, again, gives specific strategies that teachers can use in the classroom to make sure that they are engaging all students and introducing all of our students to the different cultures that show up in their classroom, and we continue to do that as well. And beyond diversity, we started to engage our families and community color more intentionally with our PASS program and LGBTQ plus student support. So all of our secondary students have a club or a group where students can take part of. Can We Talk has continued through this, but now it is open to any regardless of how they identify racially or if they can attend. We start to be more intentional about microaggressions and offering microaggressions training to all of our students, and we also adopted the one-to-one that year, but also had to look at it with an equity lens as far as who has access to internet, home, and those kind of things. So, and we partner with the Schools Foundation in that first year, and they provided Kajits, which is a hotspot with offer that as a resource. So we didn't stop in 16, 17, we just haven't updated it. Many of you know, like 16, 17 was like a pivotal year for us. Dr. Doe retired, and then Kyle was the superintendent. Mr. Hayden was the superintendent for the, was it 17, 18? No, I'm sorry, together. 17, 18 year. And as a community and as we just experienced some challenges and some opportunities during that year. And so it forced us to really take a hard look and listen to our community about how we were moving forward with the equity work. So we had to take a step back and we began to refocus. The Equity Advisory Committee, we had shifted them, and our hope was prior to 16, 17 was that each school would have an equity advisory but it really wasn't happening. So at the end of the 17, 18, some were doing it better than others, but it wasn't at a level of, I would say, satisfaction to several community members because we re-engaged, and we now have our Equity Advisory Council about once a month, and it's a representation of a variety of parents and community members. We try to be intentional to have a connection to each school. Ask that our the members of that make sure that they're connected with the site council and other components of whatever school. We also started Delta, which is an advisory group made up of only parents of color, parents who have their they identify racially as a person of color, and they have a student in our school that also identify as well. We meet with them as well once a month. So the first year we spent a lot of time identifying our purpose. Here, this current year, last year, a lot of the focus around was recruiting, so they provided a lot of input around that, and they also provided a lot of input around what is informing our strategic plan that we are so what the shift, we also started a partnership with the Midwest in Plains Equity Center, and it's a federally funded program that provides specific technical assistance to districts. And our partnership initially with them were to one, they were helping us specifically around how do we engage our community groups authentically and help, so that they can make sure that they feel like that they're being heard and we are, listening to them and then wrapping back around and using data to make decisions. They also helped us to relook at our culturally relevant rubric, which we don't call it a rubric anymore because it was kind of checked off. Source or tool that we are now intentionally embedding with our curriculum as we are, like this year, on the front end, we were trying to be more intentional about being proactive with embedding equity and not having it to be an afterthought, which within our strategic plan, we're also trying to be more intentional around that. And then here in the future, they're going to actually partner with us and our board members to really thoughtful about how do you adopt an equity policy around equity so that it's impactful, and also have positive outcomes where you're just not necessarily copying somebody's policy or what we do. So we continue our partnership with PEG, Beyond Diversity, as our foundation of raising your racial equity awareness. We also partner with them. We've also partner with Lawrence Memorial Hospital and the Public Library. This past year, they both reached out to us and asked could they have their staff members attend Beyond Diversity. So this entire year, they've had a couple of people attend the Beyond Diversities that we host, and we're hosting one July 1st and 2nd, and the library is actually sending 31 staff because they're paying for half the cost. So I'm not the library, the hospital. So they're sending 31 of their staff members, and we're, I can send the rest of our staff, but it's a 50-50 split. We continue to engage all of our those partnerships that we have with Boys and Girls Club, Lawrence Library. There may be some others that I'm forgetting, but are in the midst of in our strategic planning process of making sure that equity is more embedded in what we do and not, because for some it felt like it was in isolation or an afterthought, so we're trying to be more intentional of what all of our decisions, and that's what the strategic planning process has focused on. Our data, we did early on see some narrowing in the gaps in some of our disparities, racial disparities, and then we kind of plateau, and then some years took a dip. So we are now, we continue to be more intentional about that. So what the firm who we partner with to do our strategic plan, all of the research shows, and as we look at the research, equity has to be embedded or you that's the intentionality. Follow-up questions for you.
If you could, maybe briefly describe what a Beyond Diversity training really looks like. And also, I think Shannon policies that have really been affected by this.
So Beyond Diversity is the specific education group is their 2-day foundational training, and basically the 4 agreements in which we have honestly most of our spaces in the district use these as norms. Stay engaged, speak your truth, experience discomfort, and expect and accept non-closure. is the foundation on which is, the premises are. And so when you go, when you participate in that, those are the four things that they ask everybody to do. And the facilitators look at data, look historically at the disparities, and provide some historical context around why we see the disparities within our district. And then the 6 conditions, which are a little more deeper, and it, for some it takes, you know, a while to like apply it to what you do daily. But the first one is to focus on the personal, local, and immediate. And the second one is to isolate race. And when the focus on personal, local, immediate just means necessarily generalize or say, well, they or that is to, you know, talk about your own personal experience. And definitely use I statements. And then isolated race just means asking what does race have to do with this situation, or, and when you're asking that question, it's just making you mindful of the impact that race may have on a situation that you consider. And it also forces you to think about, if you really can't say how race is impacting it, you may have some missing voices at the table as well. And that's number 3, which is normalize social constructs and multiple perspectives. So to ask who's not a part of this conversation that probably should be a part of the conversation, and then how do I engage involved in the conversation if they're not. The 4th condition is to monitor the agreements, which throughout the conversation you're doing. Then the 5th one is to use a working definition of race, because we all come to a space and how we're defining race may be very different. Then the 6th one is to examine the presence and role of whiteness. So just thinking about historically and institutionally how decisions were made, policy was made, and how it possibly could be steeped in whiteness or traditions that didn't necessarily take into account in the compass. I give you the agreements and the conditions. Identifying where you are you thinking, believing, acting, or feeling, and just centering yourself so that you can engage in or emotional, just really trying.
So policy work, so have been on policy. What that looks like as a policy, we have better at it. Our non
control of this facility. Changing how shower stalls look.
And that's the thing, how design work facility, we really pushed our design teams to take it off.
One of the things that I'm happy with,
LMH maybe.
public library has been one of my children. An internship currently. Hopefully, Lawrence Memorial Hospital.
So, this summer, right now, probably working right now, we have part of the leadership program. Departments, and so we think about healthcare, for the most part, our students just think about being a doctor or a nurse. But this whole idea of exposing our students to other parts of the healthcare field. They are really, opportunity to sit with them. They're really engaged in board meetings. They're challenging. CEO for us, they're challenging him in some of this. This is definitely a good partnership and bringing some other partnership around. But our journey has been long. Of course, it hasn't come without challenges, and so we're still seeking to close these achievement gaps. And what educators know is that about where we are as a city, where we are as a county, we look at even life expectancy, living wages. On each side of those, they do on the east side. One of the things that we're continuing to challenge is this whole idea of, and first of all, understanding we can't change people. So we always talk about the achievement gap. Well, how do we address the achievement gap? Opportunity gaps. How are students have access to these? We look at the what do we really believe about all of our learners. And so what we're doing now is beginning to have conversations about bias, beginning to have conversations about where we see those gaps are in terms of the work that we've been doing. Like I said, we've been doing it. And I tell people, Lawrence is in a very huge opportunity for Lawrence. Just today, 3 governmental entities that are talking about equity. Following Summit, Missouri School District, approach the idea of talking about equity and out. No, we don't want to talk about equity. But what we're doing here today is a true true testament to what's really possible. And so when I tell people that we can be the best school district, because we have these resources and that, we're here to talk about race, but now let's talk about where we see the gaps in terms of, disparities in discipline, how we address those. So there are still some challenges, but I'm excited about our strategic plan for what we'll approve tonight that will begin to continue to address some of those areas. And so we see those gaps posed. And what we want to do is really institutionalize it. Part of the culture. And so I tell our staff is what I want us to do is legacy work. So when all of us, when we're retired, we can look back 10, 20 years and say, we had a part in really changing the narrative. So that's kind of where we are with equity. Still continuing to balance status quo. And I like some of these images of equity where they show the three boxes outside the fence. That's cute, but they're still outside the fence, right? And so how do we get them to stand? So, questions on our journey?
I can say what I've observed is but my experience has been, I think students feel more empowered. They may have had a voice previously, but I know, as a principal, as a emails from students. Still to this day, they'll share, they feel like something. Call it out and also propose. I would say, and Dr. Lewis could probably talk more about it, but the systems as far as like the impact that those students, I think, have been profoundly impacted and probably professions, because I was on the selection committee and they all talked about traditional healthcare field, and now they're being exposed. They had no idea that you can do this. That kind of exposure and being and it'll be interesting.
Equity is not measured. Practicing behaviors in our class. In addition to exposing our students to healthcare field, partnered with Equal Opportunity Schools. That really minority students and their access to AP classes. Currently are not enrolled in AP class, but could be successful in all, for the most part, artist students and or that's how we begin to measure the impact of.
That was the biggest change I face of what an AP classroom looked like really did. I would say the other thing I saw as a teacher, you know, the reality is, it's kind of like, you know, in 13 years I worked for 8 superintendents. Incredible, incredible turnover that occurs, and this is one of the few one of the few ideas that's emerged that's actually it's lived, you know, and I think that gets a great deal of buy-in from staff when we become so accustomed to, we have a superintendent and they throw out there, this is kind of their piece, and then a year later they're gone and that piece is gone and it's in a filing cabinet. This is stuck around. I mean, this predates me. I think that on that teacher side of it, not really, it doesn't really answer your question, but that's what's created the buy-in at the staff level.
I've been plugged in 2009. We've all had a lot of different membership over that time. Everybody's been really good. That said, and I think both, when a teacher goes through the Beyond Diversity training, they either get it immediately, or don't get it immediately, and those that do, go back and start putting it in. Not a teacher, go in and they seek out kids that they work with. So, that's huge, because a lot of times all the kid really needs to do is. Safety, we're talking about how do we put programming together that's about relationship being formed and whatever.
I don't believe I've been to a single meeting where we discussed. I had lunch with Dr. Lewis. When that becomes part of the work that you do, what we've seen is this kind of individuals who are marginalized. It's good for building culture. Begin to maybe take a deeper dive. Your work that become a part of.
Some part, like, and organizations, everybody else should be a chief equity officer. Talk about equity at every meeting because it's part of the culture is the culture.
Outcomes improve.
As, you know, as the elected bodies, it's really important to you know, come back with more information, because I don't really. I think we do a really good job of that. How much of your chargers are lost, iPhone or iPad chargers, you know, really talk that through, thinking how does that impact people? $10 or whatever we might charge might be an actual. Yeah, that's good. So, and it's something you have to constantly
Just another perspective though, this has been over a dozen years, so. One point in the process, there was a champion for equity. Capacity for equity and keep. I'm not sure it would be where it is. That's sort of the evolution and the journey that equity work can go.
Then just to add on to what Patrick has said, there were, like, I think we've evolved to this place of, well, yeah, we really shouldn't have an equity department, we all should be champions for equity. Because early on, there was discussion about now we're recognizing. So we've evolved, we made missteps, we made mistakes, but you just have to continue on. But, I mean, we shared our highlights, I try to share some of our challenges. Challenges and continue to have challenges. But we just have to be open to the process and knowing that we're
I think that piece of like knowing that there's, one of the things I love about having everybody at the table right now is about like where can you have the most impact on those challenges, on the challenges that we see with kids when they come to oftentimes it's that early childhood education. And that's a space where all of you touch financial, we all touch at some point or another have a role in what happens with early childhood education, and one of those what can we do to move forward?
Now we gotta
Stunning
go.
conversation, so.
Yeah, my one last comment
We're,
is.
we're approaching making this thing.
I want to publicly thank this board, not only this past year, but those that have been on the board for quite a while, for making equity a priority, and definitely in the budget. You know, if you want to see if.
That we ran over, but I kind of anticipated we might have a longer report, so hopefully.
Fancy graphics and a beautiful presentation. We have 4 slides that aren't even. It's kind of a roadmap. I have.
There it is.
We put this here as well to kind of talk about the internal piece of what we're doing. I like that we're going kind of from the micro to the macro, and that's not to create a hierarchy. After this and it does take a broader shift in our community in order to impact that and the impact that those actions can have, particularly when you're talking about on a smaller scale, granted a scale that encompasses every single young person. And that impact in the immediate is over time. But as we see more and more broader understanding of what history means, what qualitative than quantitative. So Casey and I are going to talk about efforts that we currently have underway. We're going to talk about moving forward as well a little bit, and then future opportunities that we've identified as places for conversation within the city and external to the city. So I will let Casey kind of talk about the internal things that we're doing.
I'm Casey Toomey. I'm one of our assistant city managers for the city, and 2 years ago,
in an effort that we'll get to eventually, the city manager named me as our LGBTQ plus liaison for our executive's office. And in that role, I have sort of become a champion for equity, and that has kind of expanded into terms of racial equity in our organization here over the last year. And Commissioner Ananda and I have worked a little bit on it, and so thank you for letting me visit with all of you today. We're going to talk a little bit about our recruitment, hiring, and benefits kind of policies and practices as an organization, and then spend a little bit of time talking about some of our work with our advisory boards and commissions. And then we'll get into a little bit about the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, our Municipal Equality Index scorecard, and then, I got those in the wrong order, and then the DMC study. And I think the county may be speaking about that, so we'll probably breeze through that one. But just to kind of go back up to the top and talk a little bit about our recruitment, hiring, and benefits. So as an employer, the city has been trying to be, I liked the words more intentional. We have been trying to be much more intentional with the work that we're doing in terms of being a attractive employer and recruiting diverse applicant pools. Some of our work has been through being much more intentional in our outreach efforts in terms of recruiting. So looking to some maybe some organizations that we haven't looked to in the past to aimed at attracting a more diverse applicant pool. So maybe that is the Black Municipal Officials organization, or Women in Law Enforcement, trying to reach out to folks to, again, recruit a more diverse applicant pool. Another effort that we made last year was to remove any question about criminal convictions on city applications. So there has been a ban the box effort. You may have heard of that. And so last year we were able to remove that off the front end of our city job application. Now that's not to say post-offer that we don't still conduct appropriate background checks. We do that. But the thought is by eliminating that on the front end, you're not preventing folks who might otherwise be qualified from positions from applying. Also in terms of recruiting and hiring practices, we have tried to increase diversity on our hiring panels. In our organization, racial equity continues to be an area where maybe we aren't as diverse as we could be. So racial diversity on our hiring panels isn't always something that we're able to achieve. But when we expand that definition, that working definition of equity, and we look at other areas, whether it's gender or age or maybe position in the organization, we try really hard to reach not just having all the higher level managers on a hiring panel, not having only municipal services and operation employees, hiring those folks that are serving in that department. Again, just attempts at trying to be aware of our implicit biases and try to get some diversity of perspective looking at that, folks. We do have annual diversity training, or I'm sorry, every other year, diversity training for all of our employees. And then each year, our employees are also required to review and sign a statement of individual respect. And that talks about how they behave in their workplace and how they interact with their workers, their coworkers, and their colleagues. As far as benefits, the city as an employer has also done some work in recent years to try to extend health care and other benefits in this area to domestic partners. So the city is self-insured for our health care, so because of that, we're able to do a little bit maybe than some other agencies might be able to. But there are a number of areas where we can control and define the familial relationship for those benefits. So we've been able to do that in recent years. And then also, here recently, we've been able to offer more transgender inclusive benefits in our healthcare package that we offer to our employees and their what's the word I'm looking for, dependents. So we've been able to make some progress in that area. I think Commissioner Ananda is going to talk a little bit about our advisory boards and commissions.
So on the city commission side, board, we had a report
survey last year, we reported it this year.
2019, all right. We did have a report that was self-reported demographic scanning, and we found that our members on our advisory board were largely white. So that was something that we very intentionally have taken on in the last year. I think we'll probably be doing 2 years of the program that is kind of heading out the other direction. Our goal is to improve that diversity and our representation on our advisory board, load onto otherwise minoritized. That I think is something that make those appointments. Policy work, particularly on a local level, and I think we're finally at a point where we're ready to of that organization is that the goal of DARE not to not count that information, but that it becomes essentially obsolete because there aren't enough I'm also on the CJCC, so that, so I won't go into it, but we have the process on that. We have approved the forms that will be used by law enforcement on that, and I'm very excited to see where that goes. Community interact with people. And we'll be gathering, we'll be doing the trial period in starting in September, and then we will be gathering. I will let Casey talk about so the human rights.
Does a municipal $506 cities across. And this is mainly to 62 out of 100 possible points. Hard on improving our score. Separate from the Finally, hate crime reporting. KBI, and then the KBI. Apparently, in order to get additional points, to see if we can get those. Not just because we want the points, but because we do want.
Forward, that's a very broad and probably summarized understanding of where we are. I will also say that this is something that has already in the last decade made very intentional. Happening, but there certainly be a coalescence of so as we move forward, we're really looking at how we can implement some of the strategies that we are implementing. So one of the things that we want to do is integrate equity into our and I think that this is something that Ford touched on as well is, you know, there's or is it both and? How does that work? So we will be looking at making this a priority or making it a critical success factor. What an advisory board will see is that a conversation that we want to have. I think that we're also looking at the role of the city. That I have been listening as well as Jasmine. Health department, equity, advocacy organizations, et cetera. That is, I think, a broader piece of that conversation, not just our city commission, but and really looking at how we can bring all those together and who else needs to be at the table. You know, we're looking at but who owns the businesses in this community? How are we supporting that? Looking at our advisory boards as part of that conversation. Our schools, obviously, the health department, advocacy groups who have been doing this work for decades before we even run this conversation. Are just a few of conversations that are happening.
self-selected group that is all theirs advancing. Guide yourself through, or they also are out there. To send the
As we communicate with as a community, historically shown up a really highlights the word embedded, how our policy impacts generally, and so it requires a lot of internal and external processes. And so when we look at moving forward and what are some of the possibilities, there are a lot of things that the city can do. There are a lot of things that the city can't do. But, you know, if we take what we have done internally and look at what can be externally, a lot of communities have looked at things like sandbox initiatives. Externally, when we're considering going forward, so what role do we have in that? Again, the equity coalition
So I really like your to-do list, obviously, I'm only gonna be there. But one thing that, I'd love for us to dig in more would be to job shadowing. Having, kids that don't necessarily have to have some kind of college degree to get into a job, that if we can somehow create a pipeline. About that, I don't remember if I talked to you about it before, how some high schools actually work. MSO is our water streets department, yeah, sorry, just public infrastructure, basically.
Okay.
So just funneling kids into that if they don't feel like they want. So, and especially since that, department I know is having problems with recruiting.
I guess what I would say is I have enough data to say that yet. I've been sort of sitting waiting for people to come to me, and that's not a good way to be. It's just been a nature of other items on my to-do list. But one of the comments I shared with Jennifer is when you don't know what you don't know, and so being more intentional with reaching out to people in the Yes.
I guess I'd like to just chime in for a minute. I really appreciate the comments about those opportunities. I think we also really should be looking at, really benefit from the relationship.
And now, so Pam and Casey have both.
Not just me, lots of folks who are other staff that are in the audience.
I guess.
Well, I think over the past 3 or 4 years.
Hospitals programs. The diversity. That's really where the power of that works. Yeah.
We have the workforce here. Presidents, you know. How amazing would it be for her to know at that time? definitely anybody's going to education, it's hard to find teachers. As long as I'm here, but as long as I'm here, you have a job. You know, I think it's huge for like them, but not only that, but it's sat in the seat here and here. Future.
That's why I get a little frustrated when how we need to start focusing on keeping new graduates in town. We already have all of these kids in our own already that need jobs as well, and I mean, I'm sure if we look at the demographics of KU graduates, you know, it's gonna be very. I really like the idea of instead having an intentional focus on 12 and recruiting from them, rather than focusing on starting a new business and field, and we love those, but those are very. And I think the chamber, not that I want to speak for you, but I think you guys even have a shadowing program now.
Well, we try and help all organizations that are looking for shadowing. Colby Wilson, their director, with Patrick. I'm on the Schools Foundation board as well, and so we probably need to work on having maybe one organization that really kind of is the point person for these shadowing opportunities, so that we can filter and get people to the right opportunities without having too many places trying to coordinate with employers, so they start they can shut down after having too many.
Well, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but I would say it's probably Patrick. Yeah, so that's really your conduit to having those conversations, I think. Build up, what would those shadowing opportunities look like?
Great to
really
share
good
the
segue
news.
also.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. One thing I would encourage is talk to kids about government careers. Lots of students want to be photographers. But, you know, when you think about our largest employers, they are the city of Lawrence. All the jobs that are within those government. All the things, whether it's being
to talk about here's a, we're here to listen and to learn. So just to look for opportunities to collaborate. So hopefully, I don't think our presentation is gonna take very long. Have a conversation at the end about where are there some partnerships to collaborate, maybe need some technical career training versus so.
Because I don't use this Windows version.
There were some references to, the law enforcement contact study, disproportionate minority contact study. We weren't really gonna focus so much on that, we could certainly provide more information if that's something that all of our law enforcement partners working together to study. What we really wanted to do was just really talk about data and not start with an end in mind, and not start with a laundry list of things that we've done. Because I don't think that would be true, accurate to where we are. I think this is really just an opportunity for us to talk about what we're seeing. And our focus today would be in terms of the youth that are getting involved in the law enforcement system, and that really, we're not, there's no list of here's our grand solution as to how to solve this. This is really just data to help inform maybe some of these conversations.
Okay, when we did the study session, primarily the session culminated in what are we going to do with JDC in the future, because things have changed. Juvenile detention in the future, because things have changed pretty dramatically. The county signed on to the Annie Casey Foundation's Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiatives in 2011. And part of the initiative is you're looking at conditions and confinement, you're looking at risk assessment tools at intake, you're looking at probation culture, and those kinds of things. And through that work, there were 5 counties in Kansas who signed on, Douglas being one of them, Wyandotte, Johnson, Sedgwick, and Shawnee. And through that work really is what culminated in Senate Bill 367, because a lot of the things we're putting in place were making a huge impact in terms of youth ending up in the deep end of the system. So I wanted to kind of just share with the county and with you all where we're at and what we saw last year in terms of our kiddos. Last year, well, maybe it's been 2 years ago, the county kind of reorganized and put most of the functions under one umbrella in terms of all county responsibilities in terms of youth and adults. And so those fall within my department. And if I could get this thing. So first of all, criminal justice services involves these things: juvenile intake and assessment, truancy and diversion, immediate intervention programs, conditions of release, day school, community corrections, and juvenile detention. Those are all the juvenile functions that fall within my department. And so we just talk about intake and assessment is where any youth in the community can be brought by law enforcement. It can be 0 to 18, can come through intake either as a child in need of care, which would be out of the care and control of the parent, and or as an alleged offender. So in 2018, this kind of shows you what our intakes look like. As you can see, the juvenile offenders basically account for 55% of the kiddos that we saw in intake. There were 126, and there are 95 child needed care cases, and there were 6 youth who fall within both categories. One of the things that kind of skews, well, it doesn't really skew because we don't really show it, but one of the things that changes as a part of the JDAI work is that we have what we created was what they call an ATA, an agreement to appear. And so an officer in the field, rather than taking time and bringing a youth to intake, can issue them a ticket, and then they have 48 hours to report to intake to go through the intake process. But that way we don't take officers off the street, and we don't have youth coming to intake unnecessarily for minor acting out kind of behaviors. So you can kind of see the age groups. I mean, primarily what we're seeing is teenagers, which shouldn't surprise anyone in 2018, and that's fairly specific. We took over intake and assessment last July, so we haven't had a full year, so this is really 6 months worth of data for 2018 that we had. This is just the demographic. As you can see, it's primarily male, primarily white, and primarily non-Hispanic youth that we see But I still think that's a fairly large African-American number coming into intake relative to the community's population of people of color. Here we go. So the juvenile justice reform efforts, basically, when we have this detention assessment instrument, we determine if they can qualify for detention. Most youth are not going to qualify. A simple battery, assault, behavior at school, whatever, shoplifting, those are not going to qualify. You'll be booked and released, but you will not come into detention at all. So it's really, detention is reserved for youth who commit really serious crimes. We have some shooters in there and people who've done some pretty serious stuff. So what we've seen is a dramatic shift in the population in detention away from minor offenses to more like felony level offenses or currently acting out. Generally, the only thing we override for is if there's a weapon involved. So if there's a gun involved, we will do an override for the court to review when that happens. So you can see in 2018, the notice to appear, what we call an ATA, accounted for 2,922 notice to appears were issued in Douglas County, which it's called agreement to appear, not Douglas County. In the state of Kansas, there were 2,922. In Lawrence, we call it an agreement to appear. But it's had a significant impact in not having kids come into the system unnecessarily. This is just some agreement to appear data. You can see over the years kind of what it looks like in our community. This is just Douglas County data. We would notify the district attorney that they didn't appear before us. We'll continue to attempt to contact them. And generally, if they end up going to court, we're going to see them again for the processing piece. We do all the booking of juveniles for the sheriff's office.
Yeah, maybe go back there. So
Sure.
describe what is on that chart for the green for the other.
Well, non-agreement to appear means that those are youth who are brought in by law enforcement to intake. So what we're trying to do is avoid having law enforcement off the street. Yes, this includes everybody. No. Generally, though, most ATAs are criminal behavior. Because most youth who are child needed care, they're looking at what are we going to do with this youth, and we're responsible for finding a place for them to land, either with a relative, other parent, or someone else in the community who care for them. So it's primarily just criminal offenses that get the ATA, but it might be something minor like a shoplift at Dillon's or Walmart or something like that. And it wouldn't rise to the level of needing to be brought in because the crime isn't very serious.
Pam, I don't know if you get into this later, but I think wide variety.
Yeah. They can be 0 to 18, and it's generally out of the care and control of parents if the parents have been arrested. If the youth is out after curfew and they can't find a parent to release them to. I mean, there's just a variety of reasons that a youth might be a child in need of care. Most generally, we can place them back at home with some work, getting a hold of a responsible parent to take them. There are times we put youth in police protective custody because there's issues at home that need to be resolved, and so they can go into PPC, what they call police protective custody, for 72 hours, and then they're going to be seen before the judge to decide the next course of action for that kiddo. It's really a good cooling off period too. So if you have an issue at home, it may not be something where you need to be removed, but it may be a good cooling off for everybody to kind of sit back and reevaluate what's going on.
So it's everything from
Everything.
to truancy to
Mm-hmm.
runaways to
Yeah.
kinds of issues.
Also, we years ago we took over the KU truancy and diversion program from what was then SRS, which is now DCF. They originally had one staff member who was the support person for that program, and they opted not to continue. And we felt like that was the biggest deciding point where a youth might end up in the deep end of the system is if we can't get them re-engaged in school. And so the county at that time made a decision to provide the staff support to the KU truancy program so we could try and keep these kids in school and not end up in the deep end of the system.
It's a really unique partnership between KU, county,
Yeah.
and schools.
Yeah, it's been a really great program. We do it with the School of Applied Behavioral Sciences. They have senior intern students who mentor students that are on the truancy caseload. And they're required to meet with them so many hours a week doing academic work and then just fun time activities when they're succeeding in attending school. And as you can see, we worked with 71 youth in the 2017-2018 school year. It's always hard because the school year doesn't really fall within a calendar year. But even if we get a youth assigned for truancy, say in May, and we haven't really had a chance to work with them, we're going to carry that case over into the fall and provide them with support. So hopefully we don't start with a truancy problem at the beginning of the next year. And that's kind of different because SRS used to close the cases all at the end of May regardless of the status. And if they've not completed, we continue to keep that case open and offer services to the family in the hopes that we can keep those kids in school. Day school is really what we're seeing. Well, we only serve kids to 9th grade. And then mostly what we're seeing in day school is the youth that are going to the shelter truancy program who are not successful. We've seen a huge uptick in the number of truancy students who attend day school. And it's worked out really well. It's been great. And the day school is a fabulous partnership between the county, the court, and the school district. And we serve a ton of, I think last year we ended the school year with 41 students assigned to day school. After 9th grade, they go to the shelters truancy program. So we only do it with, it has to do with, there are two different truancy programs.
What department?
Applied Behavioral Sciences.
Okay. I remember reading about Chief Khatib.
He's at the KU Management Center.
Oh, okay.
He's doing law enforcement leadership classes.
Oh, so it's not.
Yeah, it's similar kind of. Yeah, that's funded by the county along with day school. Yeah, yeah. It had to do with compulsory attendance and that youth can sign out in high school. So we just had to have some kind of a cutoff to determine who would serve whom. So this just shows you the age groups of the youth that we served. That was sort of surprising to me when we took over truancy. I didn't realize we would need car seats for students. And, you know, we know those are family issues more than they are kid issues. But we really do continue to work with them. And we offer the mentoring services even after they complete truancy. So the youth have the opportunity to continue with their mentor even though they've completed the program. And we have a lot of youth who take us up on that because they really enjoy the relationship with the KU interns. I don't have it with me, but I can get it for you. Yeah. It's an incredibly successful program because we feel like it's one of those risk and protective factors. If you can get kids engaged in school and feel connected in school and feel success in school, they're more likely to complete high school and obviously go on to more success in terms of earning. This is just the demographic by gender, race, and ethnicity. Day school, we've had day school for 21 years, surprising. Even I have to kind of surprised by that. It's something we started back in 1998 with the district court, the superintendent at the time. What was happening in 1998 was the detention center was overfull. We were over capacity every day trying to figure out what we were going to do with kids. And what we did was we kind of did a breakdown of who was in there, and primarily the reason they were in there was for probation violations related to school attendance and or school behavior. And so with a $51,000 grant, we started day school in detention. And we felt like if we could provide more supports in the community and keep that kid in school, we could keep him from being in the deep end or being out of home placement altogether. And I think it's been incredibly successful at doing that.
Can you just talk a little bit?
When we took over case management from SRS, when the juvenile offender caseload moved to the county, we had about 100 youth in custody at that time. Right now, well, now would not be the factor because we don't have kids in custody other than at the correctional facility, but our caseload would be less than 15 before we ended case management for offenders. So it was significant, and we were keeping more kids at home and not needing out-of-home placement. And even when we have kids in day school who are in KVC custody, Cobb Valley Center custody, but attend day school every day. Even though they don't live in the community, they're from this community and they attend school here. And it's just, I think it's just a way for some stability. It's something that they know and feel supported in.
Any data that shows the graduation rate?
We have a number of kids graduate from day school, but I don't know if we have that. I'm sure we could dig it up because we keep ridiculous amounts of information. This just shows you the average daily population in day school for the last, through 2018. I think this is probably through December, based on when we did these presentation for the county. Yeah, we have a number of kids who graduate from high school and or completed GED. That's the other thing we do is if they're not in a position to graduate because of their credits, we're going to work towards looking if they're able to pass a GED. So we'll do all the pre-testing and even facilitate their attendance at GED completion, and we'll follow through until they get it done. And we pay for it. We make sure it happens so that we can ensure that they finish their high school curriculum in one way or another. This kind of just shows you the 2018, you can see the number of child needed care or truancy cases is, well, it's not up from the year before, but we're just seeing a lot more of it than we did in the years past, which I think is a really good use of day school. Then this is the demographic just broken down by gender, race, and ethnicity again for day school students in those 2 school years. Then we have the juvenile offender programs. Immediate intervention programs is what came out of Senate Bill 367. So if a youth comes to intake and they've committed a shoplifting, or it can be really almost any battery, obstruction, that kind of thing, they can be offered an IIP, which is essentially a supervised diversion. There are 4 levels of that diversion, and that's prescribed. So the like administrative level, it's 3 months. We absolutely have no contact with the youth, and they can complete without any interaction. We don't have any more law enforcement contact. Then the case closes, and there's no criminal charges or anything, so all that is dropped. And so each level has a prescribed timeline and how often we're allowed to actually converse or meet with that student or that youth. We found that to be pretty successful. We're actually in Kansas. Lawrence is the #1. Douglas County is the biggest user of IEP across the whole state, which is pretty amazing. We're pretty pleased. And then conditions of release supervision, basically those are youth who are detained, but the courts want to be supervising them until they determine what's going to happen next. And so if a youth is on an IEP or conditions of release, if they end up getting subsequent charges, we will count the time, their good time, towards their next sentence if they have a sentence. So if a youth on conditions of release has been on conditions of release for 6 months, but their sentence would be 9, they're only going to have 3 months of supervision in addition to what they've already done. So we count all that time. So they have more control of when they're done than they used to. So it's a really positive thing. As you can see, the supervised diversion or supervised probation, the numbers are way down. It's at 25. And this is what we kind of anticipated with the new law, is we wouldn't see as many youth adjudicated or have criminal records. We would see more youth dealt with in the early phases, and we wouldn't see as many kids come full circle. We have 8 youth in a juvenile correctional facility at this time. I will tell you, all of them are on the honors pod, every single one of them. So that's a really positive thing. So obviously they've gotten a lot of out of their time with us and with the state. Conditional releases youth that are released from the correctional facility that we monitor for a period of time to determine that they don't commit new crimes. We have 2 courtesy supervision youth who are out of county, kids that came to our county to live, and we supervise them for other courts. And then we had 3 youth that came from out of state that we supervised for other states. It kind of gives you an idea of who we're seeing at the facility. Well, the IEP is brand new. We only started that.
Since that, I mean, when you're thinking about, because when we toured,
JDC, the detention numbers are way down, and we anticipate they will stay down, and that's why we're trying to figure out how we want to retool or what do we want to do. we had a recent meeting with DCF about the crossover kids who are really offenders, but they're really on the child needed care side of the world, and they're having a hard time finding appropriate placements. July 1st, there's the big change where they won't allow what they call valid corridor violators. Kids who run away from placements constantly are now able to be in a detention or secure care center. That will no longer, the detention portion will end on July 1st. So there's about, I want to say 25 youth that are in detention centers for running behaviors, and they've got to figure out what to do with them on July 1. So they're panicked. And I think we want to help be a part of that solution, but we haven't made all the decisions about how that's going to look. Like I said, we're diverting kids. They said in Kansas they had 1,788 kids diverted through the IIP, and we're a big part of that. And this is just a demographic on the immediate intervention programs. Like I said, they're basically 4 levels, pre and post, and they're prescribed. So it tells you that most of the kids were level 1, which would be like administration level, and most of those closed. We never actually, sometimes we just have to call in to do the paperwork, and that's the last time we see them. So 68% show it's successful on just that initial IIP. And they can still be offered an additional IIP. So it's not like you're going to go into court because you failed one time. We'll talk to the DA and say we want to give this kiddo another try, or they may want us to give them another try, and so they could still pass on the second or even third time. It's just they may move up a level, but they're still going to be given the opportunity not to have a criminal history. This is just the IIP demographic. Conditions of release, like I said, it's kids who've been in the detention center that the courts want to release on supervision, and we're going to monitor them fairly low level. The thing about statistics in detention or even in criminal justice is they're not always clean, because people carry over from year to year, and so you don't want to count them too many times. So we try to be very careful about that. So this just tells you the average daily population of youth on conditions of release, and then the average length of stay on conditions of release for those youth. So the average length of stay on conditions of release has increased, but then there was only 3 in 2018. I'm having a hard time with your. This is the demographics on those youth on conditions of release, just so you have an idea of who we're serving. I believe this presentation is on the county website, so if you want to look at it, you're welcome to do so. Then in summer of 2017, fall of 2018, we started house arrest, or fall of 2017, we started house arrest. And the house arrest was really first established for the adults, but the commission made a decision to include juveniles as well. So house arrest is set up so the court can put a youth or an adult on house arrest, but we do not charge that client any money. We don't want to be a barrier for them being released because they can't afford it. So we have a number of youth at any given time, usually about 9 kids that are on some kind of house arrest program, and they're monitored by staff, house arrest staff, and by detention center staff on the evenings and weekends. So this kind of gives you the demographic or the daily rate for those and average length of stay on house arrest. So generally it's usually youth who've come through the detention center that the court wants to give the opportunity to go back in the community and maintain community ties, maintain jobs, and try and be successful without being in the institution.
We don't charge you to have house arrest equipment. For the privilege to be on house arrest. Problems with credit and real problems associated with malnutrition. They didn't want to charge for that, so we don't charge that fee. It's available regardless of your ability to pay.
This is the community corrections demographics, average length of stay, and the ADP for youth on intensive supervised probation. So the average daily population decreased by 3%, but the length of stay increased by 8% from one year to the next. And we kind of anticipated that more serious offenders who are assigned to JISP would end up staying longer because they have longer sentences based on more serious crimes. Because if they're lower level or low risk, they would probably be assigned to court services. And those are the youth who are not going to spend as much time on supervision. And this is just the demographics for ISP youth in 2017, 2018 as a comparison. And then we just talked about the future of JDC, and we don't need to talk about that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's basically traffic stops, I believe, is what they're studying. It's actual traffic stops, not arrests. I mean, they're gonna evaluate each traffic stop, and what happened at that traffic stop if arrest occurred, but it's not gonna really impact what we're doing. I think, the state's working on some things to look at DMC. We've been looking at it for a long time. Our numbers are down, but the disproportionality of it hasn't changed, unfortunately. And that is part of the work of the Annie Casey Foundation, although there's been some turnover at DUC, at Department of Corrections, so we have not had a leader in that respect. And hopefully we'll get back to that task of looking at racial and ethnic disparities in the correctional system. And it's not just on the juvenile side, it's on the adult side as well. If you look at every demographic we have as a department, you're going to see that disparity everywhere.
I hope we can get through the DMC study first for that, and then use the results.
No, we don't really. I mean, we ask them about it to make sure that we're meeting their needs, but we don't track it. Well, at the meeting, these crossover youth, KDOC Juvenile Services busy patting themselves on the back because we've kept a lot of kids out of the system, but we've really just shifted some of that issue to the DCF side of the world. There are a number of youth already who are what they call one-nighters, where they spend the night in the office or in a foster home and come back out every day to the office. I want to say there's 75 kids that are doing that currently. So we know there are 25 youth in detention centers for running behavior. The minute we open the door, they're going to keep running. And I think there are just some management issues with certain kids that need more services that the current programs and services that DCF have aren't going to meet their needs.
So they're receiving.
Correct, or through Caw Valley. It could be through KVC, but they're technically assigned to the custody of the DCF, with whichever management agency supervises them in their jurisdiction. You'll see KVC, you'll see youth in custody, yes, for sure.
What role do you, what do you think the model should be?
Well, that's a good question, because really it's a housing issue. I don't know. I mean, I know at one time we had to stop the First Stop program for kids in placements, but even the placements have it's kind of been an interesting thing where they wanted to shift the offenders out of the offender world, but they kind of closed. There was this whole situation where they separated child and needed care kids from juvenile offender kids because they were supposedly so harmful for each other. But now we're right back to where we were. We're just not calling them offenders. They're classified as child in need of care. They may have some offender issues, But a lot of times they have a lot of mental health issues and/or behavioral issues that make them very difficult to serve.
If that kid felt like they were connected to a building, that was their safe space, where the relationships were happening, that seems like it would be, and I know we target that. How will we be I know this is a conversation probably to engage. Dr. Lewis?
I think the issue has been, it's more of a housing problem than and then the school connection is involved because if you can't find housing in the community where the youth resides, then you can't stay connected to school.
Yeah.
So it's like an all-around failure if you can't get a youth served in the community.
Yes, but I mean, housing is an issue regardless of what county you're in. Placement is an ongoing, decade-plus, problem that social services has faced. So it does strike me that there is this connection here. And then probably there's planning that I don't know about, but how we will engage those particular kids in our buildings.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, so you're saying there's 25 kids in that scenario?
In Kansas. In the northeast, in northeast Kansas, there's about 25 kids in detentions. I'm sorry. Oh, two, I think. From Douglas, and that doesn't mean, I don't know what other kids from Douglas are in secure care. I don't know how many kids are in secure care. I was saying in northeast, I'm sorry, I should have been clearer. To either secure care or something. Take off,
And so that's kind of what the thought process is that they
Yeah.
just leave.
How do you engage them? Yeah, so there's secure care centers in Geary County. St. Francis has one at Sedgwick County. And there's nothing in the northeast for kids in secure care. A one-nighter, yeah. Yeah, he was in Atchison, and he would come back every day. It's unconscionable to think a kid's gonna live basically out of a suitcase. Every day he'd go to the KBC office, get his clothes, go to Atchison for the night, come back to day school in the day, go to KBC office, go back to Atchison. No, it's here in Lawrence. But we've had the bus drop him off at KBC in the afternoon.
And I think this might be my misunderstanding
Sure.
of how the day school works.
We don't have a wait list.
We struggle a lot with conversations with day school. Very different as school districts. And so it's a very
Sometimes the dilemma is that they want to stay in day school, but we have no legal reason to keep them.
parents say, can you please keep
And the school district's we do a nice credit recovery in the summer, month of June. And it's basically you stay as long as it takes you to complete the work. It's amazing how quickly they get work done when they know that they can control their out date. It's really productive and very successful. I think we only have 2 left that are still attending out of the 21 who started summer school. For some of the students, this is the first success they feel in school, partly because they don't attend, and they're just, they have a history of failure. And so when they get connected and they have supports and they see good grades, and it's not because of lack of intelligence, it's really a lack of attendance, a lack of feeling supported in school for whatever reason that is. And sometimes it's the family dynamic in terms of valuing academics and valuing attendance in school. Because I think sometimes people don't look at the long-term cost of not attending school or not graduating. It's big. Well, thank you for your time.
Well, we're at 5 o'clock. I don't think there's really a great way for us to wrap it up other than saying it's been a good brainstorming and thinking about.
I just realized this is a ramp. I kept feeling like
Oh, you are actually.
Fellowship.
Not just in your head.
Tamara Cash is on the council as well. So, okay. Council.
That was not it.
I was gonna say, I've been chewing on this for an hour.
Oh, well.
Oh, yeah.
Everything overlaps. It's not just one piece. Glad to see that the city has coordinated. If it was the case, they would have told me. So now they understand embedded, it's fine.
Are you driving back?
I remember all kinds of
Are you driving back?
You could probably write.
Well, I gave Lisa a ride, but I'm supposed to go pick my wife up.
Yeah. So Lisa needs the ride.
Lisa needs a ride, so I don't want to leave her here.
Okay, let me see this.
This might be happening. Well, I do enjoy,